Now I'm going to go back to my 5 minutes. So I'll flip through real quickly for these here. Let me just tell you one thing. When we're talking the consent order, right now there is, what my perception is, there is a view that we need NMED to hold the Department of Energy accountable for getting the work done. If we ever get to the point where we get stipulated penalties and we even have to have disagreements, it's because we have failed. It's our job, Department of Energy. It's my job. It's my folks' job, working with the contractor to get this work done. And when I say the work done, the issue then is what exactly is clean, and then based on the funding we have, how long does it take to do that? So that was the best question we asked here is, can we do the work with the, well, if I plan out to do $180 million worth of work a year, 189, and we only get 150 million, I'll tell you right now, the answer is no. Unless some sort of miracle occurs. And so part of this whole consent order is the flexibility to get the work done the right way based on the resources we have available. And my job is to make sure that the resources are effectively and efficiently used. Jay pointed out and he said, hey, you know, you're only using 1/6 going to clean up. I'm not going to, talk about that. The issue comes is every dollar we get should be spent to affect cleanup. There's people that have to work in finance. There's people that have to work in human resources. There's other people that don't turn a shovel, but my job is to make sure that we have the most money that we can to actually turn that shovel. So that's just the first thing. Let me go into here. Wait a minute, where am I supposed to? Okay, I've showed this before. The thing that goes back to what Secretary Flynn's comment is, and I wanted to bring this up because this is the budget spiral. And I've talked to you before, I've showed you this before. In any one year, we may be in 3 different budget years, okay? And we are in that case right now because we're right here in May timeframe, okay? And so we are executing on fiscal year 16. That's done in that we already have the appropriation, $185 million for 16. Okay, the important thing that goes into the consent order that Secretary Flynn, he only mentioned one aspect, but there's 2 different aspects of it on why July is selected. The first one is, for example, on fiscal year 17, okay, so you have planning, of course, you come around here. President released the 17 budget in February, okay? So you come around here, it then goes to Congress in February. Congress has to actually decide how much money we get because they do the appropriations, not the president. So the president for fiscal year 17 said that we were going to get $189 million. Andrea just mentioned, I think before, the Senate has marked it up and voted and passed their bill that says 199. That's $10 million more than the president requested. The House has a markup, they haven't voted yet, but they had said, nope, you're going to get the same as you've gotten this year, 185. Okay? So that's important because if we come into here and we start doing the annual work plan on the consent order, we start knowing what the actual figure is that Congress is deciding on for that next year. And then even more important that Ryan pointed out, in the fiscal year 18, we are starting to formulate the 18 budget. So we're doing 2 things that affect the consent order. The annual work plan is looking at what will be the enforceable milestones that are impacted by the actual appropriation, and it also then allows us to determine what are those target milestones that are in those 1 and 2 years out. That's why this is important to understand. And again, it comes down to, if you get to this point here, and I've asked the question again, when's the last time we've had an appropriation by October 1st? 1997. That means that when I start the year here, if there's not a lapse of appropriation, which we had 2 years ago, which meant we got no money, and we only had the money that we had to carry over, that meant that I don't do work if I don't have money. People, I don't think any of you work for free. You might for your nonprofit organizations, but you need to survive. And so in a lot of cases, we either have a continuing resolution or in the worst case, lapse of appropriation. So in a lot of cases, these years here, or these months, are very hard for us we now are backloading most of our work to these here, because that's when we finally get the money. They give us allotments a month at a time, so that means, under a continuing resolution, so that means that part of the issue that we have here is not just how much money you get, but when you get it, okay? So that's why I just wanted to show you here. So right now we're in May. So again, Congress is deciding how much we're going to get in fiscal year 17, and we are starting the fiscal year 18 budget. When we asked the CAB here for input on the priorities for 18, we took that because once it gets to this point here, which we've started that point, it's embargoed. By law, we are not allowed to show you that. And the reason it's OMB Circular A11 is because how many of you think I asked for $189 million? Do you think that's what I asked for? Do you think I asked for more or less?
More.
Okay. I can't tell you what I asked for. Because when it comes around here and the president releases the budget, if I tell you that I asked for 250 and he says you only need 189, this is just like that adequate for the CAB funding. The president has decided what we need as adequate funding. And it's not up to me to question the president because he's got other priorities like, you know, the Department of Defense, Social Security, and all those other things that have to be balanced, okay? So when we're talking about more money, it really comes down to how well do all of us convince Congress of the amount of money that is needed. And that's what Secretary Flynn was saying. The priorities are set, and funding is where you see the priorities are determined, okay? And again, we have a different perspective sometimes than other folks for where, you know, what the actual budget comes out to be. So that's why that's important. So you can see we will start here under that consent order, and it's for both 17 and 18. It's important for the consent order. Okay, so that's one of the things. All right, when I talk about our priorities there, local communities, workers, safety, transparency, and efficiency. Anybody know what the #1 strategic goal of Disney World or Disneyland is? Safety. Do you ever ask a question if you go into Disney World or Disneyland if you're going to get assaulted? No, because it's inherent. And safety should be inherent to everything we do, and you know what? We failed. I will not use the term blew up a drum and whip, like Secretary Flynn says. It was a deflagration due to a chemical reaction that blew the lid off of a drum because we did not do procedures correctly. We didn't have configuration control, and that's part of the reason why this organization, my organization, is now stood up, because we have the expertise in waste management and in environmental cleanup. And what I want to do in a year from now, after about a year of dealing with the CAB, I actually had the CAB chairman come up to me, and she said to me, you know, Doug, you'd be a pretty decent fellow if you didn't work for DOE. You know? And that's what I want you to, because I don't want you to look to Secretary Flynn or Katie for us doing our job. I want you to look to us. We are accountable for the mission. We're the ones that are supposed to make sure you understand what the mission is so that you then can decide how well we clean it up. And then we execute on that. And we use every single dollar to get the biggest bang for the buck. And you're going to hold me and my folks accountable, not these folks. Their job is to regulate. It's not to execute on that. And my job, and this is part of the issue why we talk about the consent order, is to hold my contractor. Because the Department of Energy has decided that it's a government-owned, contractor-operated system, and therefore our contracts are to make sure that they're held accountable. Okay? And so, transparency and efficiency. There is nothing we do that is classified. So everything that we're going to do, how we're going to do it, when we're going to do it, you should know. And the first thing Secretary Flynn is going to say to me, and Andrea, and every single person is, then tell me about the life cycle baseline. And how come you don't have a life cycle baseline? Okay? And that's an important document which we have revised to align with the consent order, the draft consent order. And as soon as we sign the consent order, that baseline will be out there, because you need to have that in, you know, together with the consent order to see, here's where we're going the first couple years as the consent order lays out, and the life cycle baseline shows you the rest of the schedule. And again, it's based on assumptions. How much funding is one of the major assumptions in that life cycle baseline, okay? Bridge contract. This is one thing I want to make sure that everybody understands. We are now operating under a 2-year bridge contract. Actually, it's a 1 year with 2 6-month options, but we're going to execute both of those. That's why Secretary Flynn said the end of fiscal year 17, that's when the bridge contract goes through, and then we'll have our own EM contract, okay? So that's important because at the end of this month, the draft request for proposals will be released to the public. We're having a pre-solicitation conference here, the 7th, 8th, and 9th of June. Okay, and what that pre-solicitation conference is, one day the different contractors who are interested in the work, or any of you, could sign up as part of that conference to go out on the site, and we're going to have people out there talk about the scope that we're going to be doing as far as decontamination, decommissioning, the waste management, and the environmental restoration. The second day, on the 8th of June, we will be here doing presentations on what is in that request for proposal, the expectation of what the contractor will have to deliver, okay? And then right now we're trying to figure out exactly when. There will be a separate community session where we want to get input from the community on what is important for them. Things such as small business and you know, local business and so forth like that. So I want to make sure everyone understands there, you know, and then the third day right now is for the one-on-ones between the contractors, specific contractors, to ask the acquisition team questions about what's in the RFP. So the first thing is, if you're interested, you should, you know, just kind of see the draft RFP coming out at the end of this month. Should give you about 10 days to get thoughts and then show up at that community, at least the community session. If you have any, if you want to you know, make sure that DOE is putting the right requirements on the contractor, that's the opportunity. We'll then have that draft RFP for comments open for about 60 days, and then the final request for proposals will probably come out sometime in the late July, August timeframe. They'll have whatever 6 months or whatever to put in their proposals, and then we would expect to award the contract in the summer of 17 to give 90 days to transition to the new contractor. So remember, you have an opportunity to provide input into that next contract. I'm not going to go over these. These are just, well, those are just the numbers that we had for this year's here, and I already talked about that. Just a couple of things. When we talk about, you know, the amount of funding, and I go back to the Government Performance Result Act, we have to be successful with the money we're giving, otherwise we don't have a chance of getting more money, as Secretary Flynn says. And the other thing it comes down to, I can't lobby Congress. I can't lobby anyone. It's not my job, but you folks can. You folks, the state, you folks, the community, you folks, the economic development teams can go back there and say, you see all these things we're doing? We're using the money wisely, and that's, you should have pay for performance. Instead of, and you didn't hear it from me, instead of giving money to the waste treatment plant at Hanford at $500 million a year, and that plant won't be built until 2040, maybe you just give $10 or $20 million more to us, and we clean up a lot quicker, okay? But I can't do that. You folks can. You see? But it does you no good if you go back to Congress and you don't have a single message. In my 15 years of doing budget formulation, if every single group doesn't go back with the same message, then it's easy for Congress to say, just like they told Andrea, we got no more money, okay? And that's what we need between the life cycle baseline and us showing you, just like you were saying at the end of the year, here's what we told you we were going to do, here's what we actually did. And we should be able to tell you, yeah, and we did accomplish what we said we were going to. So what this here is a picture of is the Chromium project. And another reason, I'll just kind of on the side for the consent order, it's not in the 2005 consent order because we didn't find this until after. So I would dare say one of the things the consent order needs to do is have flexibility to change priorities if you find things such as this. Because this is now our number 2 priority on the environmental management behind the next thing I'll show you, which is the nitrate drums, which was the drums that blew up, okay? Not blew up. Deflagration of the, yeah, okay, you got it, see? Secretary Flynn's heard that so many times. So this is just an example, and one of the things, here's angle drilling. This was the first angle drilling that we've done at the site, and that was to avoid some of the archaeological sites that are out there. We're very careful on that there. And the other thing that I've told you before, that at Savannah River, where I used to work for 20 years, we had 2,000 wells. You got water about 10 feet below the ground, and it cost about $50,000 to drill a well. It cost us on average about $3.5 million here to drill a well. So, you know, it's just a fact of it's not going to be any cheaper, it's not inefficient, you're just in a different environment, and that's the going rate for that there. So these here are just wells that we're looking at for the interim project. That's one of those campaigns for the chromium. And this is an injection well, this is an extraction well. We plan on pulling up the water, treating the water, and injecting it back in. There's a hearing on June 7th for the permit associated with that there. But that's the interim to arrest the plume, and then we'll have a final remediation in several years. Here's what happened with those drums, the deflagration drums. One of the things that we did was we found out temperature and pressure are the 2 things that are the big impacts on these. So the first thing, working with the New Mexico Environmental Department, we put an isolation plan. We have 60 drums, just like the one that we sent down to WIP. We put them in these standard waste boxes, and then we put refrigeration in there. So now they're in a cooled, hard contamination area. You can barely see it in the background here. And then starting yesterday, we're installing this here, which is a pressure relief device. The problem that happened down in WIP is this little filter right here got plugged. So that allowed the pressure to build up, had enough temperature, and it deflagrated. Now, between the cooling that we have from how we're storing them and installing these pressure relief devices, we have enough safety margin built in there to then start looking at treating them. The real thing we got to do, open the drums up and put in the correct kitty litter that is not a wheat-based organic kitty litter, and that will eliminate the hazard. And that's our number 1 priority that will be completed before the contract ends in October of 17. And we're hoping to have that done even earlier than that, okay? And then the last thing we have here is, this is an example of what we talk about when we go back to Congress for more funding. This is Technical Area 21, which is up near the town of Los Alamos, across from the airport. This is where the first actually the second processing facilities after the Manhattan Project started. And we are in the midst of completely D&Ding that, and then we have to take care of the material disposal areas. We had about $1.5 million worth of scope plan for 16. We pulled both the 16 and 17 work we were planning on doing and completed it for less than what we were planning on spending in 16. That's the sort of message that's got to go back to Congress, because we still have probably, I don't know, depending on how we clean up, because you can either take up everything that's there or you can cap it, and that's for, you know, all of you to determine. We still probably have $100 million worth of work to go. But right now, at the rate that we get the funding, that may take a significantly longer period of time. That's all I have.